Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. And today we've got some new research on barrel wear and the Navy's efforts to reduce it. So, starting back at the beginning for folks who haven't seen an episode on Battleship caliber barrel wear, these guns are good for approximately 300 shots. Realistically, that's 300 equivalent service rounds, which would be the largest type of shell with the full charge passing through it. That's going to cause the lining of the barrel to wear away. So, once we have fired 300 2,700-pound armor-piercing shells with a 660-pound propellant charge behind it, this barrel is worn smooth as a shotgun, and you're going to have to pull the barrel off of the ship and reline it. Functionally, the Navy does this well before that 300 round mark because, or I should say, well before that 300 equivalent service round mark. It actually ends up being more than 300 rounds. But the Navy does it before then with the fear that these ships might be called to a war and have to fire 50 or 100 broadsides during that war, in which case, if the barrel in peacetime isn't able to do that, then you lose time taking the ship out of service in war. So after the Korean War, in the mid-1950s, the Iowa-class battleships cycle through yard periods where they pull all of their barrels out, even though they aren't at 300 equivalent full-service rounds yet. They're somewhere in the 200s for most barrels. And then they re-rifle them all. But because we were building Illinois, Kentucky, and the Montanas, and because these barrels are such long lead items, which were ordered before those ships were canceled, we had a bunch of spare barrels lying around. So they pulled off the original barrels, like this one, which used to be the left barrel on turret number 1 for USS New Jersey, known as barrel 292, and they replaced them with other barrels, the ones you currently see on the ship. And then these barrels got brand new fresh rifling and then were placed at various holding points around the country and other naval bases. Some of these even go out to the Philippines when New Jersey deploys off the coast of Vietnam. So these are sent all over the place to be pre-positioned in case barrels needed to be replaced. Again, this is something that's good to do in peacetime because each one of these is 68 feet long and 120 tons. So, here's some of the new information that we've gotten on this. There are actually 3 different mechanisms of firing a projectile through these guns that's causing wear. The first is mechanical fatigue. That would be things like cycling the breech of the gun or having a shell pass through the rifling. Having the metal shell wear across the metal rifling is going to wear that down over time. But that's actually the least fatiguing part of the process. You can fire about 1,500 equivalent full service charges through this gun before you have mechanically worn it down. This is also the same mechanism that is slowly stretching the liner so that it comes out the end of the gun, which means you have to cut it off because when it's not supported by the jacket around it, it becomes easy to crack, and that crack will continue into the sleeve part of the gun. That happened to center barrel of turret 2 sometime either during Vietnam or in the early 80s, which required it to be replaced, the only barrel to be replaced since the mid-1950s. There isn't really a solution for mechanical fatigue. You're passing shells down that barrel, the rifling is going to wear away. If you guys have watched the news, you've probably heard about Russian and Ukrainian land-based artillery systems wearing their barrels out through the same mechanism. So even to the present day, there isn't a solution to this. And it's fortunate that this is the cause that is the least damaging to the barrel. Again, 1,500 rounds, so about 5 times more than the barrel would otherwise wear out. The most damaging thing to these guns, and the first thing that the Navy figured out how to solve, is the metal-on-metal friction. Each shell has a brass base ring around near the bottom of it, and that soft metal is what is actually engaging the rifling. So if you look at one that we have on display, you'll see that it's smooth. If you look at a dud that's been fired and then found, here's one of a Marine sitting on one on a beach. You can see that the rifling has been engraved into it, and that's as the shell is being pushed through here, the rifling is cutting into that brass base ring, and it's creating a fairly gas-tight seal, which is forcing all of the gas from the propellant to remain behind the shell to give it as much force as possible. There's none escaping around the edge, doing nothing. It also is going to bite into the rifling, so since this rifling spirals, it's going to cause the shell to start to twist and spin like a football as it leaves the barrel. That's going to give it more range and greater accuracy. But as this metal rifling is cutting into the brass base ring, that brass is remaining behind in the gun. So the Navy comes up with a solution for that by 1968 when New Jersey is reactivated for Vietnam. You put a pouch of an additive called Swedish additive between the first and second powder bag. When those bags detonate, it's going to basically coat the rifling with the contents of that pouch. It's going to atomize it and coat the rifling. So the stuff that's in that pouch I have seen alternatively referred to as lead foil and as a mixture of titanium dioxide and wax. Now, I don't know if that mixture is in a lead foil pouch or if during Vietnam they were using the titanium dioxide and then they switched to lead later, or the reverse of that. But one or both of those two components are being atomized to help prevent the brass from coating the insides of these and wearing out the rifling and like filling it in, making it too wide for projectiles to go through. We're honestly not sure how that mechanism works. This report here, we'll link to down below, mentions that, this report from 1994 mentions that in 1975, a theory was put forth as to why this worked. Keep in mind, they started doing this at least in 1968, 1969. But what they think is happening is the lead is melting. It is combining with the copper of the base ring, and those two things are melting and forming an alloy that will remain liquid or gaseous at a lower temperature than just the regular copper. So the gas of the explosion will be able to force it out of the barrel, as opposed to the copper, which sort of just coats the inside of the barrel or gets fused into there. This is one of those places where I have been wrong in the past on these videos. I always assumed that the Swedish additive was a Vietnam era addition, and then in the 1980s they replaced it with something else. But after reading this report, it made it clear that I had been misreading other things like the NavWeps page, which says that the Swedish additive was used from the 1960s on, in addition to the third method, the thing that is going to stop the third type of erosion that these barrels get. The third method is gaseous erosion. The propellant exploding creates a hot caustic gas, and that wears away the metal of the rifling. The solution to that was discovered in the 1980s was if you wrap an 1/8-inch thick polyurethane sleeve around the powder bag, that will burn up entirely when the bag detonates in the breech of the gun, and it burns at a cooler temperature. So that polyurethane is then going to be cooler on the rifling of the gun, which means that you will get significantly less gaseous erosion. How much less? When you combine those two processes, it extends the life of the gun to the point that the Navy no longer measured equivalent service life by the 1980s, and they were looking exclusively at fatigue equivalent rounds, i.e. the mechanical process of the shell passing down the barrel, which means that the life of these guns is extended from about 300 rounds to more than 1,500 rounds a barrel, which was more than the Navy expected the Battleship to fire her guns in her lifetime. So they said that the life of these guns was functionally greater than the life of the ship. I wouldn't be surprised if we start hearing about processes like these being used on smaller land-based artillery in the future. Things like the war in Ukraine have showed that land-based artillery still has a place in warfare, that it's not all expensive missiles. and that land-based artillery is being worn out, in some instances, quicker than it can be replaced by new manufacture, as shown by the Russians having to pull more and more of their old artillery, even going down to 1950s built stuff, out of reserve. So I wouldn't be surprised to hear about more science like this being done now in the 21st century to extend the life of those sorts of guns. Nothing similar to this was ever done with the 5-inch guns. They have a significantly longer service life because they're not firing at such a high velocity or with so much powder. So we know how many shells can be passed through one of these barrels. My real question is how many curators can be passed through. This particular rifling has had a single curator pass through it. We'll have to calculate out what the fatigue equivalent curators are before this barrel is worn smooth. Let us know what your guess is in the comment section down below. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. Your support gives us the time to research more things about our ship. There's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to support the museum and our ongoing research. Or you can support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.